The most dangerous wounds are the ones you can't see. They don't bleed or leave scars you can touch. They live beneath your skin, inside your thoughts, where silence becomes both a weapon and a shelter. You've felt it. The quiet ache that follows you long after the pain should have ended. You smile, you function, you talk about healing, yet somewhere behind your eyes, a quiet war rages on. You see, the mind is built to protect you. It studies patterns, learns from pain, and adapts to survive. But somewhere in that process, it learns something dangerous. If pain kept you safe once, maybe it will keep you safe again. That's where the war begins, between the part of you that wants peace and the part that believes suffering is security. There are moments when you can almost hear the argument in your head. Why do I always ruin things when they're finally good? The voice doesn't shout. It whispers, almost gently, as if it's trying to help. But help has a strange definition when it's been shaped by fear. You've been taught to anticipate loss, to expect rejection, to rehearse failure before it arrives, because that way at least you'll see it coming. The mind calls it preparation. The heart calls it pain. In the stillness of your thoughts, you begin to notice patterns. You push away the people who get too close. You sabotage the opportunities that ask you to believe in yourself. You replay old mistakes as if each memory is a debt that hasn't been paid. You tell yourself it's just how you are, overthinker, perfectionist, emotionally fragile. But beneath those labels lies something else, a learned language of pain. The mind speaks it fluently. There's a certain comfort in chaos, isn't there? A strange familiarity in the ache. When everything is calm, it feels wrong, like the silence before a storm you can't see. So you stir the waters yourself unconsciously. You overthink, overanalyze, pick at emotional wounds that should have healed years ago. It's not because you want to hurt. It's because pain feels like home. Somewhere deep down, your nervous system remembers that hurt meant safety once. You grew up believing that love came with conditions, that peace could vanish without warning. Maybe the people who were supposed to protect you also scared you. Maybe comfort came right before conflict. The mind learned that suffering was predictable, something it could understand, control, anticipate. So even now, when life offers peace, you hesitate. Because if peace is unfamiliar, it must be dangerous. I don't deserve to feel okay, the inner voice murmurs. It's not self-pity, it's programming. You repeat it enough, and the body starts to agree. Your shoulders tense, your stomach tightens, your breath shortens. You mistake the physical symptoms of fear for who you are, but none of this is random. Every reaction is a learned response, your mind doing what it thinks it must protect you from being hurt again. The truth is that emotional self-harm doesn't come from weakness. It comes from training. The child who wasn't comforted learned to comfort themselves with pain. The teenager who felt unseen learned that attention only arrives through suffering. The adult who keeps repeating the cycle isn't broken. They're simply fluent in a language they were never meant to learn. There's an image that returns again and again. You're standing in front of a mirror, staring at a reflection that feels unfamiliar. The mind begins its quiet commentary. Every flaw, every regret, every reason you're not enough. But then, for a split second, you see it clearly. This voice, this critic, this shadow, it isn't your enemy. It's your teacher, though its lessons are cruel. It's trying to keep you alive the only way it knows how, by reminding you what hurt before. This is a paradox of the mind. It turns its defenses into daggers. It wounds the body to protect the heart. It convinces you to hide, to self-destruct, to fear love, all under the illusion of safety. But beneath that pattern lies the truth you've avoided seeing. Emotional self-harm is a flaw in your soul. It's a defense that has overstayed its purpose. The turning point comes when you recognize it, when you realize that every cruel thought was, in its own twisted way, an attempt to protect you from disappointment. The mind learned to flinch before life could hit. The heart learned to bleed before it could be cut. And the result is the same, a constant state of quiet suffering, maintained not by the world, but by your own internal conditioning. Yet, the moment you see the pattern, something shifts. The mirror no longer feels like an accusation. It becomes a map. Every scar, every wound, every fear points to a time when you were simply trying to survive. Guilt and trauma are no longer enemies. They're coordinates to the places you still need to heal. And as you stand there, breathing into the silence, you begin to understand. Your pain was never proof of your brokenness. It was proof of your endurance. The mind learned to hurt itself because once it believed it had to. But what was once survival no longer has to be the truth. Still, the war doesn't end overnight. The shadows don't vanish. They wait. But now you can see them for what they are. You can finally whisper back to that voice, not with anger, but with understanding. You don't have to protect me like this anymore. The silence that follows isn't empty. It's the first peace you felt in years. But somewhere beneath it, another question stirs. If the mind learned to hurt itself, can it also learn to heal? Your mind remembers pain better than peace. It's not a flaw, it's design. Pain carves deeper grooves into memory, leaving echoes that never quite fade. Peace is soft, fleeting. It doesn't demand attention the way pain does. Pain insists on being remembered. It's how the brain keeps you alive. But what happens when survival becomes overprotection? When the very thing that was meant to keep you safe starts holding you hostage? Every moment of hurt leaves an imprint. The brain is a sculptor, carving its lessons into the folds of your mind. Each disappointment, each rejection, each moment you felt unworthy creates tiny circuits that whisper, "Be careful. Don't trust this again." Over time, those whispers grow louder. They become instinct, and instinct becomes identity. Imagine a child who learns that love disappears when they speak too loudly. Their brain makes a note. Silence equals safety. Another child finds comfort only after crying for hours. Their brain learns that suffering brings attention. These patterns are not random. They are architecture, neural pathways designed to keep pain predictable. Predictable pain feels safer than uncertain peace. Maybe if I suffer, I'll finally feel worthy, you think, though you never admit out loud. It's a thought that hides beneath responsibility, beneath the need to please, beneath the quiet exhaustion of always proving your worth. Your mind equates effort with value, struggle with purpose, pain with proof. Somewhere along the way, comfort began to feel suspicious. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." The architecture of pain lives in that unconscious space, the invisible wiring of your emotional reality. You don't see it being built. You only feel its weight. You repeat the same patterns, fall for the same people, sabotage the same peace, and call it coincidence. But it's not. It's construction. The brain, in its brilliance, doesn't distinguish between good and bad, only between familiar and unfamiliar. And if pain has been your most consistent companion, it becomes home. Your neurons, bathed in stress hormones, start to expect that ache the way your lungs expect air. Each repetition of suffering strengthens the pathway. Pain becomes not just remembered, it becomes rehearsed. Inside this architecture, guilt is a cornerstone. Every not enough reinforces a foundation. Freud called it the death drive, a compulsion towards self-destruction rooted in the desire to return to a familiar state of tension. Gabor Mate calls it the body's cry for connection, misinterpreted through trauma. Jung saw it as a shadow, the part of you exiled for being too much or too little. They all describe the same house, the one your pain built. There's a strange comfort in understanding this. It explains why you stay where it hurts, why you chase approval from those who deny it, why you repeat habits you know will break you. Because deep down, your brain confuses pain with safety. It's not punishing you, it's protecting you from the unknown. To the mind, an unpredictable peace is more dangerous than familiar suffering. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the hum of these circuits. Every anxious thought, every self-critical comment, every fear of failure. It's the electricity of memory running through your veins. The body remembers what the conscious mind forgets. It reacts before you even have time to think. That's why your chest tightens in peace, why you feel uneasy when things finally go right. You've been wired to expect a fall. The turning point comes with awareness. When you realize your pain isn't moral, it's mechanical. You're not broken, you're conditioned. The mind has learned to equate suffering with meaning, and now it doesn't know who you are without it. That realization hurts, but it's also the beginning of freedom. You start to see it everywhere. In how you overwork to feel useful, how you stay in relationships that mirror old wounds, how you dismiss compliments because they contradict your wiring. Every repetition reinforces a circuit. Every act of self-kindness feels like rebellion, because it is. You're rewiring something ancient, and yet awareness alone doesn't dismantle the structure. The walls of this house are thick. You've lived here for years. Even when you see the cracks, stepping outside feels impossible. The mind whispers, what if you need this pain? What if peace is a trick? It's the prison guard doing its job, keeping you safe from freedom. But here's the irony. The mind that built this cage also holds the key. Neural pathways are malleable. They change with new experiences, with repetition, with patience. Each time you choose understanding over judgment, you carve a new path. Each time you rest without guilt, forgive yourself or let joy in without flinching, you start to rewrite the blueprint. The architecture of pain was never permanent. It was a temporary shelter that became a home. The same brain that learned fear can learn trust. The same heart that learned to brace for impact can learn to breathe again. You can almost feel it. The faint tremor of new wiring forming in silence, a fragile promise that maybe peace can last this time. As the lights flicker inside the old house, the echoes of pain begin to fade. The structure still stands, but it's softer now, less certain of its purpose. You look around and realize something profound. Pain was never proof that you were alive. It was proof that you were trying to survive. And now, for the first time, you're learning there's a difference. Every time you doubt your worth, a part of you wins. It's strange, isn't it? That the voice inside your own mind can feel like an enemy wearing your face. It doesn't shout, it whispers. It waits. And when you finally start to rise, it quietly pulls the ground from under your feet. This is the inner saboteur, the hidden architect of collapse. You think it wants to destroy you, but really, it just wants to keep you safe, even if that safety costs your peace. Self-sabotage rarely announces itself. It doesn't storm the gates. It hides in hesitation, in excuses, in the quiet decision to delay one more day. It tells you that you're not ready, that it's not the right time, that you should wait until things feel perfect. It sounds rational, even protective. But beneath that calm voice lies an older fear, the fear of being hurt again. You can feel the tug of war inside you. One part wants to grow, to love, to reach. The other part whispers, don't risk it. You remember what happened last time. That whisper belongs to the shadow self, the part Jung described as everything we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves. The shadow carries your old pain like a shield, convinced that suffering is safer than change. You can't heal what you've learned to crave, the voice says softly. It's right in a way. You've learned to crave control, even when it means controlling your own downfall. You sabotage not because you hate yourself, but because you fear the unfamiliar quiet of peace. Pain, at least, is predictable. You know its taste, its rhythm, its certainty. The shadow doesn't want you happy. It wants you safe in your misery. Inside your mind live three archetypes: the child, the critic, and the healer. The child remembers every wound, but doesn't understand why it happened. It still believes that if it behaves, if it earns love, it will finally be enough. The critic is older, sharper, forged from rejection and shame. It watches you closely, ready to point out every flaw before anyone else can. It believes attack is protection. And then there's the healer, the quiet presence who waits patiently, watching the war unfold. The healer knows the shadow is not evil, it's just scared. But the critic is loud. When you succeed, it finds fault. When you fail, it says, I told you so. You start believing it's the truth. You internalize its words until you can't tell where you end, and it begins. Over time, self-sabotage stops being an act. It becomes an identity. You begin to see yourself through the lens of failure, expecting to collapse before it comes. It's not that you want to fall apart. It's that the falling feels familiar. Imagine standing on the edge of possibility. You've been here before. A new relationship, a new dream, a chance to change everything. For a moment, you feel hope flicker inside you. And then the voice appears. Don't get attached. It's not cruelty, it's memory. The shadow has cataloged every heartbreak, every disappointment, and it fears the pain of hope more than the pain of loss. So it shuts you down before the world can. There's tragedy in that, because the shadow self doesn't know that you've grown. It still thinks you're the wounded child, the one who needed defense mechanisms to survive. It doesn't see your strength. It only remembers your scars. And so, when it sabotages you, it believes it's saving you. Every missed opportunity, every broken promise to yourself, every "I'll start tomorrow" is just a shadow trying to protect the child from more hurt. The turning point comes when you recognize the pattern not as proof of weakness, but as evidence of survival. You begin to see the inner saboteur for what it is, a frightened guardian clinging to old blueprints. Its power comes from invisibility, from living in the unconscious. But the moment you bring it into light, when you name it, it loses its control. The act of noticing is rebellion. You start hearing its voice differently. When it says, "You'll mess this up," you whisper back, "I know you're scared." When it urges you to retreat, you take a breath instead. This is how the shadow becomes visible, through compassion, not confrontation. You stop fighting it and start understanding it. And in that understanding, something shifts. The critic quiets. The child exhales. The healer steps forward. It's in this stillness that you finally see it. The face behind your self-doubt. It was never a monster. It was a mirror. Every act of sabotage was an old form of love, distorted by fear. The part of you that held you back was the same part that once kept you alive. And in that realization, the walls tremble. The inner saboteur doesn't vanish. It transforms. It stops pulling you backward and begins to stand beside you, cautious but no longer hostile. You understand, at last, that healing was never about erasing the shadow. It was about teaching it to trust the light. We learned to treat ourselves the way we were treated. That's the first truth most of us spent a lifetime avoiding. When you were small, you watched everything. The tone of a voice, the hesitation in a parent's eyes, the silence that filled a room after a fight. You learned what love looked like, even when it wasn't love. You learned what safety felt like, even when it wasn't safe. And without realizing it, those lessons became the blueprint for how you now treat yourself. In the beginning, you didn't know it was conditioning. You thought it was just life. The raised voices, the quiet disappointment, the absence of comfort, they all etched themselves into your nervous system. Every sigh became a signal, every frown a warning. Your mind started recording rules. Don't speak too loud. Don't eat too much. Don't fail. You learned that love had conditions, and that peace could vanish if you made one wrong move. Years later, you still follow those same invisible rules, though no one enforces them anymore. You apologize for existing, shrink to make others comfortable, punish yourself before anyone else can. It feels normal because it is familiar. The mind clings to the familiar, even when it hurts, because what it knows, it believes is safe. Sometimes you remember fragments, the echo of your name in a scolding tone, the way a parent's eyes looked distant when you needed them most. You remember wanting to be good enough to make them stay, to make them proud, to make them love you differently. You didn't realize it then, but that longing became a kind of mirror. You looked into their reactions to understand your worth. And when those reflections were cold, your sense of self became fragile, conditional, uncertain. You were only trying to survive. The voice inside you whispers now. And it's true. You adapted. You learned to read emotional, whether like a storm chaser. You knew when someone's voice meant danger, when silence meant withdrawal, when affection meant temporary calm. Every emotional shift around you shaped who you became. As you grew older, those same instincts followed you into adulthood. You began seeking relationships that mirrored the emotional climates you knew best. If love once felt unpredictable, you found partners who made you chase it. If validation came through performance, you became an overachiever. The roles may have changed, but the script stayed the same. You replayed the old story, hoping that maybe this time it would end differently. You see, the mind doesn't seek happiness. It seeks familiarity. It repeats what it knows, not what it needs. If love once meant tension, you mistake peace for boredom. If care once meant control, you mistake freedom for abandonment. The mirror effect is powerful. It doesn't just show who you are, it reflects who you were taught to be. Psychologists call it mirroring, the process by which a child's sense of self forms in response to how caregivers see them. When that mirror is clear, the child grows up feeling whole. When it's cracked, they spend their life trying to piece together their reflection. You might think you're broken, but you're not. You're patterned. Every self-criticism, every moment of self-doubt, every instinct to withdraw is an echo of someone else's voice that became your own. Sometimes a reflection is subtle. A teacher's look of disapproval, a parent's sigh when you cried, a friend's laughter when you shared something vulnerable. Those moments taught your nervous system what emotions were safe to show and which ones needed to be hidden. So now, even when you try to express your truth, something inside you hesitates. You wonder, will this make someone leave? Will I still be loved if I'm not perfect? The cruel part is that none of this began with you. You inherited pain that wasn't yours, passed down like an emotional heirloom. Your parents, too, were mirrors of their own wounded reflections. They loved with the tools they were given, often incomplete, sometimes harmful. They weren't villains, they were patterns. And those patterns became your language of love. The turning point comes a moment you see it clearly when you stop asking, what's wrong with me? And start asking, where did I learn this? That question alone begins to loosen the chains. You realize your self-punishment isn't a flaw, it's a repetition. The anger you turn inward once protected you from losing others. The shame you carry once kept you small enough to be safe. When you finally understand that, something inside you softens. You stop fighting yourself. You look into the mirror, really look, and see not a failure, but a reflection shaped by survival. The reflection isn't perfect, but it's honest. And honesty is where healing begins. You are not broken. You are repeating what was modeled to you. And that means you can unlearn it. The same way your mind once learned pain, it can now learn peace. It starts with changing the mirror, seeing yourself with the compassion that was missing, speaking to yourself the way you once needed to be spoken to. And maybe for the first time when you whisper, I'm trying, the reflection whispers back, I know, and I'm proud of you. The brain mistakes pain for proof that you're alive, that you care, that something inside you still feels. It doesn't know how to separate emotional chaos from meaning. To the brain, pain is data, stimulation, a sign that something is happening. And so begins a loop, pain, relief, guilt, pain again. A cycle so subtle that by the time you notice it, it already feels like home. You tell yourself you hate the suffering, yet somehow it keeps finding you. Or maybe you keep finding it. There's a strange satisfaction in revisiting the wound, a pull toward the familiar ache. You replay arguments in your mind, reopen memories that hurt, scroll through things that make you feel small. It's not because you enjoy it. It's because part of you believes that without pain, there's nothing real left to hold on to. I feel alive only when I'm hurting, you whisper to no one. And in that quiet confession, you speak a truth your nervous system has known for years. The loop isn't just emotional, it's chemical. When you experience emotional pain, the brain releases stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. And when the pain subsides, even for a moment, dopamine floods in, the neurotransmitter of relief, of reward. The same circuitry that governs addiction now governs your suffering. At first, it feels like control. You decide when to feel pain. You reopen the wound. You decide when to heal it. But slowly, the rhythm begins to control you. Pain becomes both punishment and reward, a twisted kind of self-regulation. You suffer, feel guilt, then soothe yourself, and in that soothing, your brain rewards you. It becomes a loop of self-inflicted highs and lows, a neural pendulum swinging between agony and relief. Imagine your mind as two voices, the mind and the body. The mind says, we're not doing enough. We deserve this. The body replies, I'm tired. I just want peace. But the mind doesn't listen. It mistakes exhaustion for laziness, stillness for danger. It keeps pushing, keeps blaming, because guilt feels like motion, and motion feels like purpose. When you hurt, at least you're doing something. That's the paradox. Pain feels productive. It gives shape to emptiness. You can trace it, name it, Feel it pulsing through your chest. In moments of calm, when everything should be fine, there's a void, and your brain rushes to fill with familiar sensations. Anxiety, guilt, self-criticism, all of them become placeholders for meaning. You begin to crave them like an old song you can't stop humming. Neuroscience tells us that the brain doesn't seek happiness, it seeks predictability. When pain becomes predictable, it becomes safe. You know how to handle it. You know the rhythm: tension, release, guilt, repeat. This is why many people unconsciously sabotage their peace. The absence of struggle feels unbearable. Peace feels foreign, and foreign feels unsafe. The guilt deepens the cycle. After each emotional breakdown, you promise yourself, never again. You build resolve, regain composure, maybe even feel hopeful. But the guilt whispers, you shouldn't feel good. You haven't earned it. That whisper pulls you back into the spiral, reminding you that peace feels undeserved. So you punish yourself again through self-blame, overwork, emotional withdrawal, and the brain rewards you with a small, fleeting hit of relief. It's an endless feedback loop. Pain creates guilt. Guilt triggers self-punishment. Self-punishment releases dopamine, and the brain, unable to distinguish between healthy effort and harmful repetition, begins to crave the pattern. You think you're breaking down, but in truth, you're caught in a chemical reward system that mistakes suffering for significance. The turning point comes when you realize this isn't weakness, it's wiring. You've trained your brain to find meaning in struggle because it was the only place meaning existed for so long. When you were neglected, pain meant attention. When you were rejected, guilt meant belonging. When you were lost, suffering meant purpose. Your brain adapted by linking pain to proof of existence. But then comes the aha moment. The recognition that this loop isn't life, it's memory. Pain offers meaning only because you haven't yet learned to find it elsewhere. The intensity of suffering feels like depth, but it's only repetition. True meaning, the kind that nourishes rather than drains, doesn't come from hurting. It comes from healing. You start to see the illusion unravel. You feel the pull toward pain, but recognize it now as habit, not destiny. The brain resists it first. It craves the familiar hit of guilt, the comfortable ache of sadness, but you stay still. You breathe. You remind yourself that peace doesn't have to feel empty. You're teaching your mind a new equation. Presence equals proof. And as the loop begins to slow, the silence that follows feels strange, unfamiliar. But it's in that stillness, in that absence of chaos, that the real proof begins. The proof that you are alive, even when you're not hurting. You can't heal a wound by calling it normal. Yet for years, that's exactly what you've done. You told yourself that anxiety was just how you are, that exhaustion meant progress, that pain was a part of being human. And maybe it is, but not like this. Not the kind that repeats itself, not the kind that quietly eats away at your peace. Healing doesn't begin with fixing what's broken. It begins with seeing what's been disguised as normal for too long. At first, awareness hurts. You start noticing how much of your life has been built around coping rather than living. You see how often you brace for rejection, how instinctively you apologize for needing rest, how deeply you've learned to distrust calm. Self-awareness feels like standing under harsh light after years of darkness. Overwhelming, revealing, inescapable. But it's also the beginning of truth. The moment you see the pattern, it starts to lose its power. Self-awareness is the first act of rebellion against pain. Every time you pause before reacting, every time you notice a loop instead of being consumed by it, you create space, a breath, a window. That's where healing begins, not in perfection, but in pause. You start to hear your mind differently. The critic that once screamed now sounds tired. The inner child that once hid now begins to whisper. The same mind that once harmed you begins to help you see. I don't have to believe every thought, you whisper to yourself. It feels strange at first, almost defiant, but the more you say it, the more it becomes real. You start watching your thoughts like clouds drifting across the sky. Some are dark, heavy, and familiar. You're not enough. You'll mess this up. You don't deserve peace. But instead of obeying them, you start to observe them. That observer, the quiet, awakened self, isn't broken or reactive. It's the part of you that's always been watching, waiting for you to remember who you are beneath the noise. There's a stillness that comes with this awareness, a sense of returning home to something you didn't know you lost. You begin to see that healing isn't about silencing the pain, but about changing your relationship with it. You stop asking, how do I get rid of this? And start asking, what does this try to teach me? The moment pain becomes a teacher instead of a punishment, it loses its grip. In those moments of awareness, you learn to speak to yourself differently. You stop using shame as motivation. You begin saying things like, I'm allowed to rest. I did my best today. It's okay to feel this way. These aren't affirmations for the sake of positivity. They're small acts of reprogramming, new pathways forming in a brain that once equated worth with suffering. The turning point arrives quietly. You no longer see your mind as the enemy. You start understanding that every part of it, even the parts that hurt you, was trying to help. The anxiety that kept you alert once kept you safe. The guilt that haunted you once kept you loyal. The anger that scared you once protected your boundaries. You see that your pain wasn't random. It was intelligent in its own way. Misguided, yes, but purposeful. And with that realization comes peace. Not the loud, cinematic kind, but the quiet sort that settles in your chest like a slow exhale. You begin forgiving yourself for not knowing better. You start thanking the parts of you that once only knew how to survive. You are doing your best, you say softly to the mirror, but it's safe to stop now. The reflection doesn't argue. It just listens. Healing isn't a straight line. It's a spiral. You revisit the same lessons, the same memories, but each time from a higher place of understanding. You catch yourself falling back into old patterns, but now you see it happening. That awareness alone changes everything. You realize that progress isn't the absence of pain. It's the presence of choice. You finally have the space to choose differently. As the days pass, your relationship with stillness changes. Silence, once unbearable, becomes sacred. You find beauty in slow mornings, in breathing without a goal, in existing without performance. You no longer crave the chaos that once made you feel alive. Instead, you begin to crave peace, not as an escape, but as your natural state. The same mind that once sought pain now starts seeking balance. Then comes a climactic understanding. Healing is not learning something new. It's unlearning what pain taught you. You let go of the belief that love must be earned, that peace must be deserved, that worth must be proven through suffering. You realize that the mind that once hurt you was only repeating what it learned from others who were hurting too. And just like that, the pattern breaks. You're not the wound anymore. You're the awareness of it. You're not the story. You're the storyteller. The loop begins to fade, not because you forced it to, but because you finally stopped feeding it. There's one last breath, one last whisper. It's okay now. And for the first time, your mind believes you. When the mind remembers love, pain forgets its purpose. For years, it fought a silent war within itself, defending, blaming, hiding, surviving, never realizing that the very enemy it was fighting was also the part of itself longing to be seen. But something changes when love is remembered. Not romantic love, not the fleeting warmth of another's gaze, but the quiet, unshakable awareness that love was always within you, waiting for recognition. The war doesn't end with a victory. It ends with understanding. You begin to see that the mind never meant to hurt you. It only repeated what was taught, carrying old scripts, old fears, old survival instincts that once kept you safe. Every anxious thought, every wave of guilt, every pattern of sabotage, they were never acts of cruelty. They were acts of memory. And memory, once understood, can finally rest. The mind begins to soften when you stop demanding perfection from it. You learn to listen, not to its chaos, but to its rhythm, to the heartbeat beneath the noise. You realize that the thoughts once loud and terrifying are just echoes of a scared child trying to find love in all the wrong places. And in that realization, you find compassion. You stop asking, what's wrong with me? And start whispering, what happened to me? That shift changes everything. Suddenly, pain no longer feels like punishment. It feels like a messenger. Each ache, each memory, each wave of discomfort becomes an invitation to understand yourself more deeply. You begin to thank the pain for showing you where the healing lives. You thank the fear for keeping you alive long enough to find peace. The same mind that once felt like a prison now feels like a garden, one that needed only patience, light, and care to bloom again. There's a moment, small, almost imperceptible, when you catch yourself thinking gently. You wake up one morning, and the first thing your mind offers isn't criticism, but calm. It might say, "Let's take it slow today," or "You've done enough." You pause, startled by the kindness. You realize that the dialogue has changed. The voice that once tore you down now sounds like an old friend who has finally learned your language. You are no longer your own enemy, the voice whispers. It's not grand or cinematic. It's soft, like the first light after storm. You don't need to fight anymore. The mind has laid down its weapons. The heart has unclenched its fists. And for the first time, both are on the same side. As the days move slower, you start noticing beauty where pain once lived. The same silence that once screamed now hums with peace. The same solitude that once felt heavy now feels sacred. You begin to exist without effort, without the constant need to fix or prove or earn. You exist simply because you can. The war within has turned into a conversation, one built on trust rather than fear. The turning point is not dramatic. It's gentle, like watching winter melt into spring. Pain doesn't vanish. It transforms. It becomes a teacher, not a master. You look back on every breakdown, every sleepless night, every heartbreak, and see that none of it was wasted. Each moment was a lesson in returning to yourself. Every tear watered the soil of your becoming. In the quiet of this new understanding, you start remembering what love truly feels like, not the kind that depends on someone else's approval, but the kind that breathes through your own awareness. Love becomes the oxygen between your thoughts, the warmth beneath your ribs. It's the feeling of finally being on your own side. You don't need to chase it. You remember it. You always had it. And when love is remembered, even the shadows change. They no longer terrify you. They dance in the light. You see that the shadow never wanted to destroy you. It wanted to show you where the light could reach. The same darkness that once haunted your dreams now becomes a contrast that makes your awakening visible. It's poetic, almost sacred. The way pain gives birth to peace. The way wounds become windows. The climax arrives not in words, but in silence. You close your eyes and feel it. The merging of every version of yourself you've ever been. The child, the critic, the healer, the observer, all of them standing together in the same light. For the first time, there is no division. No good you or bad you. Just you, whole, complete, forgiven. You breathe, and the world breathes with you. The war within is over, not because one side won, but because both sides remembered they were the same. And in that realization, everything begins again, not from pain, but from peace. The light breaks through the shadow, not violently, but naturally, like it was always meant to. The mind, once a battlefield, becomes a sanctuary. You sit within it, quietly grateful, knowing that healing was never about erasing the past. It was about remembering love through it. If this made you reflect, share it. Someone else's mind might need this reminder too.